One of the more surprising releases we've gotten from Hasbro in the past few years has been the Star Wars Retro line, a recreation, or kind of a copy of the original toys that we might have grown up with had you been a Star Wars fan and lucky enough to have been born in the 1970s or 80s. The cherished memories we have of these toys coming back. Now, this isn't the first time that Hasbro/Kenner has done recreations of the vintage original Kenner line. We had this 4-pack from Power of the Force 2 that never really went anywhere. But as a obsessive new hat collector of original trilogy, I'm all in, because if it's 3 3/4 and it's all original trilogy, regardless of the style, and I would call these, retro style, it's still a 3 3/4 figure. So yeah, I've been getting all of the original trilogy figures, and honestly, even a couple of the new Disney Plus figures if they jump out at me. And really, the interesting thing is, well, one, this is a line that fans were asking for a long time. And it's something that fans said Hasbro said they wouldn't do. Just like they said they wouldn't do a Ralph McQuarrie concept figure series. Until, of course, they did a Ralph McQuarrie concept series, even reissuing all the figures in a box set. So yeah, Hasbro definitely has a history of saying they won't do things, like they also said they would never do the vintage collection, and that happened. So why the push to do the retro collection? Well, really, trend. When Reaction, or rather Funko and Super 7, starting with Super 7, put out the Reaction line, which was a reimagining of different properties in what would be thought of as the Star Wars 3 3/4 form factor. And it's great because you can reimagine all sorts of properties like this, and there's no likeness rights because of the minimal deco. And it's fun to see what other properties would look like had they been perhaps released in the 80s in this form factor, this 3 3/4 limited articulation. And because of what Funko and Super 7 have done, we've gotten a really large number of these reaction figures from a ton of different IP, including Star Trek, which honestly cracks me up, because the fact that we had Star Trek figures done like Star Wars figures, kind of cool. All right, so that's what sort of pushed Hasbro into finally, stepping up to the plate and saying, all right, we're going to make retro figures. For the longest time, they refused to allow Super 7 to have the rights to this, because they had full rights to 3 3/4. It was just a different style. This would be sort of vintage styling, less articulation, less detail, and they all fit in. All right, so the thing is, though, these new figures, as I said in the beginning, aren't quite right. They're not exactly reissues. They are, recreations are all new tooling. It's not like they have the tools for these figures. So they have to be retooled, re-sculpted. It's kind of like that movie Multiplicity, where there was way too much Michael Keaton and not enough Andie MacDowell. Most movies have not enough Andie MacDowell. But looking at, you can see how they're kind of copies of copies. The deco, the sculpting, there's some things that are missing. Yes, I know my toys are obviously really beat up and are missing paint just from being played with for so many years, but you can see that if you really look closely, like Bosk here, if you look at the way the straps on his suit are, or the thickness of his neck thingy, the turtle neck tube, the red tube that's around his neck, you can see that it is thicker in the old toy versus the new one. So the colors don't quite match. The sculpts aren't 100%, but they're pretty close, and I think the real question is, do these fulfill that need? Now, some of the figures are closer than others. Palpatine, as an example, the retro figure on the left that has that weird extra piece of chunk on his cloak there, you can see. I don't know why that's not removed. It was probably just part of the sprue that got left on, but all the figures have that. Weird. And there's also been some kind of trip-ups on how the capes and soft goods have been done and the overlays, because original Star Wars figures back in the 70s and 80s had kind of 3 eras of capes. The first one were the vinyl capes on the left there, and then kind of in the middle there were cloth capes, and then at the end, like Anakin and the Emperor there, the capes were turned into sculpts. Same with the Imperial Dignitary. So this kind of left little oddness out there, like the original Mandalorian figure that had a vinyl cape in the retro line. It's not quite correct, because by the time this figure would have come out post-Jedi, the Kenner line had moved past vinyl capes and were now on soft goods or even sculpting. So technically this one is a little bit probably more accurate, the second Mandalorian release, where his cape became soft goods, more in line with the tail-end figures that Kenner was doing when they evolved past the vinyl. So it's those kind of details that I think are really important, especially there are fans out there, and myself included, that maybe looking to recreate the vintage line in total with the retro figures. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk about because I've been debating whether or not this fills that need. For the modern line, I've been collecting every 3 3/4 figure, and there's still a few that we're waiting for, like the, Imperial Dignitary and the correct Endor Trooper and the Death Star Trooper in gray. But to have the actual original 92 or 106, 120, however you count them, this has been kind of my long-term list to do eventually, is to rebuy all the old figures and have a full set. Most of the ones I have as a kid have been, played with and are missing a lot of parts and paint. And Hasbro has been cool to also offer figures that weren't in the original line, which I wish they would do more of this. So Grand Moff Tarkin that came with the game board set, or there was also a X-Wing speeder, a snow speeder, Luke, that came with the Hoth game. And these figures, again, while they do feel a bit like copies of copies, obviously there was no original Tarkin, but you can tell he was kind of modified off of the Imperial officer with a new head. But he does work. And they've also done figures from the new content, the Disney Plus. So, when you put these two figures together, the idea is they should feel like figures from the 80s. What I also really like about them is they make great pocket figures, because without the added articulation, have hands pop off in your pocket, they last. they work great if you want to carry a figure around with you. All right, so I've already said that I'm all in on 3 3/4 regardless of style. So I'm going to pick up any retro figures that get put out from the original trilogy, hands down, without even questioning it. It's my new hat collecting, if you will. But what's interesting is with the focus on doing retro figures for all of the Disney Plus, we're seeing more and more of these as almost the initial release, seeing retro figures often before we see Black Series or Vintage Collection. Sometimes they go hand in hand. But the question is, do these figures, are they authentic enough, one, to feel like they could just fit in with the original line, and the ones that we are buying reproductions, recreations, so not new characters like from the Book of Boba Fett, but the characters from the original trilogy being redone, even though they're copies of copies, will they work as a substitute for acquiring the original line? Like, could you collect just the retro figures? And if you are just collecting the retro figures, will we get all 92 recreated? And would that satisfy our need for a vintage collection? So if every figure from the original line comes out in retro, honestly, for me, I think even though they are copies of copies and they're not quite right, I feel like, to me, that would satisfy it. If I could get all 92 figures, I wouldn't be trying to track down the originals and pay, ridiculous amounts of money for an Imperial Dignitary that doesn't have his nose smashed in or, the paint off, because that's what happened to almost every Imperial Dignitary and Emperor figure, is finding one with good nose paint is incredibly hard to do. So, yeah, while it would probably be insulting if they made the Imperial Dignitary in retro before they made one in the Vintage series, hint, hint, I like what they're doing. And I do personally find it completely satisfying. It fills that need for vintage figures. And if they would make all of them, I would recreate the 92 in the retro line. I wouldn't feel the need to actually go track down all the original figures. And I would pick up, some characters from the new Disney Plus stuff. Why we haven't gotten any from the prequels, that, to me, feels like the biggest miss. I mean, having figures from episode 1, 2, and 3 to go along with that, that'd be awesome. So what do you guys think? Does the retro line replace the vintage line for you? Would you collect the retro line in lieu of recreating a vintage collection? Let me know in your thoughts below how you collect this line. Love to know your thoughts and how collecting is affecting all of us. Thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.